So today I want to discuss the Kimberlee Singler case. Kimberlee Singler is a 35-year-old woman from Colorado who allegedly shot two of her children. She's currently awaiting extradition from the UK, where she fled to. So first I'll go over details and timeline of the case before giving my thoughts. This is a newer case, so there's not a whole lot of research or stuff out there yet, but there are some really weird things about this case that I want to go over. So Kimberlee and her husband, Kevin Wentz, had three children, ages 11, 9, and 7. In 2018, they filed for divorce and things became ugly and contentious. In September of 2018, Kimberlee called the police and said that Kevin pulled a knife and became threatening and verbally abusive. There's no way to know whether this really happened. This is what Kimberlee alleges. All we know is that Kevin was not arrested. He was not charged with anything. Court did grant a request on Singler's behalf in May of 2019 to restrict the amount of time Wentz could spend with the kids. In August of 2019, Singler ignores court's request to appear, was delivered a summons. In 2020, the divorce was finalized between Singler and Wentz. In 2021, Singler wanted to move to Florida and petition for sole custody. And most of 2021 was spent arguing this issue, and this is where things get even uglier. In October 2022, Wentz filed an emergency motion to prevent an abduction. A court hearing was scheduled and Singler did not show. In August of 2023, she filed another emergency motion to restrict Wentz's time and failed again to show in court. In November of 2023, the court decided that Wentz was not a danger to the children, so essentially shutting down Singler's attempts at blocking Wentz from access to the children. Then on December 18th, a motion was filed that ordered Singler to turn the children over to Wentz so he could spend Christmas with them. Around midnight, December 19th, so later on that day, Singler calls to report a burglary. Police arrive and find 9-year-old Ellie and 7-year-old Aiden dead from gunshots. The 11-year-old daughter and Singler were injured and taken to the hospital. Singler was not a suspect at this time, so she was free to leave the hospital, and she did. A few days later, the police realized that this was not a burglary, that it was staged, and so a statewide manhunt for Singler begins. Around Christmas time, Singler boards a plane to the UK and flees the country. Singler is tracked down to a hotel in the Kensington area of London and arrested on December 30th. She's facing 2 counts of murder in the first degree, as well as attempted murder for the 11-year-old. She's also facing child abuse and assault charges. So the thing that keeps coming up with this case when I hear people talking about it is that Singler's motive was that she couldn't have the kids, so she had this burn it all down to the ground mentality. If she couldn't have them, no one else could. But she wasn't actually losing the kids. The order that she received that day on December 18th was only for the dad to have the kids for Christmas. Singler was still the custodial parent. She wasn't even in danger of losing the kids. So it makes me think that something else is going on here. Something else led to her doing this. And I know she hasn't been tried yet, so we should put allegedly in front of all of this, but the autopsy reports came out. And the autopsy reports are pretty inculpatory as far as pointing to Singler as the guilty party. So Aiden and Ellie not only suffered from gunshots, but they were also drugged. They were drugged by something called doxylamine. Doxylamine, I think I'm saying that right. Doxylamine is an antihistamine that's found in Unisom. That's probably what they ingested, was something like Unisom. So that suggests that Singler tried to knock them out so they wouldn't be cognizant while the shootings were going on. They also had stab wounds or incisions or some kind of cut on their neck, like someone was trying to make sure that they would die of their wounds. December 20th was the day that Kimberlee was supposed to hand the children over to Kevin Wentz. So this is one day after she calls 911 to report the burglary. After she leaves the hospital, she goes to a public library and files a motion to compel the court to continue a status conference. This motion reads, on December 18th, 2023, at about 11 a.m., someone broke into my residence and attacked the children and myself. Ellie and Aiden were murdered, and the child's name is redacted. The 11-year-old and I were left to die, but we survived. I was just released from the hospital yesterday, and the child is still in the hospital. Given the circumstances, she is in temporary custody of El Paso County DHS. I had no ability to call 911 until approximately midnight on December 19th, so obviously I had no idea that Respondents' Counsel had called me or sent me any emails. I only just learned of this status conference, which is scheduled for today, December 20th, late last night. My residence is currently locked down during the investigation, so I have no access to any of my personal belongings. I am on a public computer in a public place at the public library. I have no access to a private computer right now, which would allow me to attend the status conference virtually. I have no ability to attend in person either, as I do not have access to my driver's license and therefore cannot drive myself anywhere. Furthermore, I am unable to attend in person or virtually or otherwise because I have lacerations on my neck and wrists, and although I have been released from the hospital, I am weak, in a great deal of pain, and will require further medical treatment, checkups, etc., for at least the next 10 days. I do not have access to my phone or to my laptop, as all electronics inside the residence will be kept for an undisclosed amount of time by CSPD as evidence during the investigation. I have tried logging into my email from a public computer, but it requires that I receive a security code to my cell phone, which I have no access to right now. So I am trying to figure out a way to gain access to my emails. So there's a lot to unpack with this statement. The biggest thing is the time gap between when the burglaries happened, when the murders happened, and when she called 911. 12 hours is just such a long time. I mean, I've heard of cases where people were shot in the face, their legs snapped in half, and they're still able to call 911 or crawl or get help almost immediately after. When people are in incredible danger, an emergency situation like that, they often have a rush of adrenaline, even when they're facing mortal injuries. She says she's too weak to handle anything with these court proceedings, but a few days later, she boards a plane to the UK. What also stood out for me was the time that she says the burglary happened, 11:30 a.m. I guess the autopsies will reveal the time of death of the kids. This means that she drugged them almost immediately after receiving the motion from the court to turn over the kids to Wentz. Singler really seems to have a hard time making it to court. She seems to really hate having to go to court for some reason. But it's interesting that looking through the documents, I didn't see any other time where she made a motion like this, explaining why she wasn't in court or asking for more time. She just kind of no-shows. But here, the day after her children are murdered, she goes to a library and types all this out. She seems like she's trying very hard not just to explain why she can't go into court. I think having your kids murdered and your home burglarized would be a pretty good reason to not show up to court. She lays all this out trying to buy herself time. What's also strange is though she had ample opportunity to kill the 11-year-old and make sure that the 11-year-old was dead like the siblings, she fails to do so. I don't know exactly what the condition the 11-year-old is in, but I read that she's recovering and doing fine. I don't know if the 11-year-old girl was drugged like the other two, so if she was, maybe she doesn't know what happened, doesn't recall what happened. So doing some digging around, I found the Kimberlee Singler case discussion group on Facebook, and there was a number of people talking about her being in a pseudo-relationship or a fantasy relationship with Henry Cavill. I couldn't find the original post about this. It looks like it was taken down. It looks like Kevin Wentz is no longer on Facebook, has maybe made his Facebook private. And then I stumbled upon a Grizzly True Crime covered this, and they shared the post from this. So according to Kevin Wentz, the ex-husband, Kimberlee was talking to some sort of account pretending to be Henry Cavill. Not sure if it was a fan account. He says he thinks it was a sex trafficker. So there's some interesting stuff here, like she was either catfished or had some kind of weird fixation on Henry Cavill. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Is it Cavill? Cavill?
Cavill is pronounced like travel. Cavill.
Kevin Wentz apparently made a Twitter or X account just so he could talk to Henry Cavill fan pages or Henry Cavill sock puppet accounts. It says, "Have you seen Kimberlee Singler? Apparently she has been in contact with you," suggesting that Kimberlee Singler was talking to a fan page or a sock puppet account of Henry Cavill's. So we don't really know what the Henry Cavill connection is, if she was catfished by somebody, if she was infatuated, like obsessed with him. So it supports this idea that there's some kind of Henry Cavill connection, whether she was catfished or is obsessed with him, is that she flies to London. She doesn't fly to a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty like Russia or Cuba. She goes to the UK, London, and specifically the Kensington area. That's where she was when she was picked up by authorities. And that's where Henry Cavill lives. He lives in Kensington. It's hard to imagine that someone today could be fooled by a catfisher, like a celebrity catfisher. Like, I remember hearing about a lot of these stories 10 years ago, like with the Chris Birdman Anderson case. So in 2012, Chris Birdman Anderson was texting with what he thought was this teenage girl. And he technically was, and this girl thought she was texting with him, but they were actually both texting a catfisher in Canada who had created fake accounts for both of them and texted with each of them and then extorted money from Anderson. But I don't know. I just don't hear about stories like that happening today. I don't know if those celebrity catfishing stories, I mean, I guess it could happen. I guess it's possible. Now I'm going to go over some of my final thoughts about this case. Given the timeline and the children being drugged, I think it's safe to say we can rule out a burglary. The only two people who would commit these murders are either the father, Kevin Wentz, or Kimberlee Singler. I don't know anything about Kevin Wentz's alibi at the time of these murders, but Kimberlee was the custodial parent. Wentz and Singler were only supposed to be communicating through an app. They were not communicating, or they were not supposed to be communicating via text or in person. And a lot of people would say also that Kimberlee fleeing to the UK right afterwards points to her guilt as well. As for my thoughts on the motive in this case, I can't really say I know anything for sure. There's just not a lot of information. I don't know really anything at all about this woman. But just going off of a speculation on a case like this, if you just simply told me this woman was obsessed with a celebrity, killed her kids, ran off to this country where the celebrity lived, what do you think is going on here? My answer would be something like that this woman used fantasy to escape, to deal with her problems. With the stress of the continuing custody battles and raising 3 kids and everything else going on created so much turmoil that she used fantasy and limerence as a way to deal with that, to escape. Limerence is where a person becomes obsessed with another person, having romantic fantasies about another person, a specific person, not a bunch of people. Limerence is sort of the mind's way of soothing or self-regulating when you are going through a very hard time or you're dealing with extreme loneliness. People confuse it with love, although it's very different. Limerence is more focused on the intensity of one's own feelings rather than on the well-being and mutual respect within a relationship. Most people who are limerent are not violent. Limerence is generally thought to be a normal, transient emotional state that most people go through at some point in their lives. But it can progress into something more serious, like obsessive love disorder, which is marked by more harmful and antisocial behaviors like stalking. And again, this is all speculation. For all I know, all this Henry Cavill stuff was made up. But for someone to commit murder, something pretty extreme must have happened. A lot of people who experience limerence and obsessive love disorder describe feeling euphoric. They describe the sensations, feelings as being very intense. They feel intensely satisfied escaping into this fantasy world. If this is what happened, it's doubtful that Singler's fantasies were limited only to fantasies of Henry Cavill. She likely also fantasized about having an exciting life, a jet-setting life, a life of glamour, adventure. That's typically what fantasy lives look like. It might be she was addicted to these feelings of euphoria, and in her mind thought that these acts of killing her children were a last-ditch desperate move to achieve this life she wanted. I don't know that I wouldn't have to say this, but no matter what happened, whether she was catfished or obsessed with Henry Cavill, that it doesn't excuse what happened. So those are my thoughts on the Kimberlee Singler case. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.